and welcome to the BizDev Podcast, the podcast about developing your business. I am David Baxter, your host, and I am joined today by Gary Voigt. He is the alternate to Scrooge in The Christmas Tale by Dickens. That's who it was inspired by. How was that? That good? I get you? He's not even insulted.
Yeah,
Our guest likes it, though. That's okay. We are, more importantly, we are joined by Michael Worthington, who's the founder and principal of Marketecture, which I have to say, I love that name. That is muy bueno. As someone who has named companies and knows the absolute nightmare that is, muy bueno on the name of it.
Thank you.
We're going to talk to Michael about his business and all sorts of good stuff in just a little bit. But first, we want to talk about chat bots, because that's what everybody talks about now. Actually, I'm a chat bot. That's this whole thing. I'm just
the advancements in AI and machine learning when it comes to creative tasks like conversations and writing and art. This, we've talked about the art thing for a while now, but the chat has now turned into conversational discussions and even being used as prompts to write creative copy. So there are people writing children's books.
This is the same technology. This technology okay, so back up. So the thing called ChatGPT was made public. It's been around for years, but it's been hiding behind the scenes. And they released it publicly, or one OpenAI released a version of it. There's lots of versions. Google has one that they talk about. A lot of their keynotes, they use it to have conversations. It's really awkward every year. They've been working on this, but it became live because a small company who has nothing to lose decided they were going to release it. And this is the same technology that about a year ago, not even a year ago, 6 months ago, that one of the Google researchers claimed was a sentient AI and that it had rights, and he got fired.
Yeah, it sent a ripple through the interwebs for sure.
You can go see it for free. It's called ChatGPT from OpenAI, and it's just a big prompt, and it's very simple. And I heard a podcast that you can actually ask it to write code for you, and it will.
I've seen that. And I've also seen a podcast that had it write the script for the podcast talking about how eventually AI might be able to create a script for a podcast. And then at the end, this was Marques Brownlee. And at the end, he's like, because it wrote that entire script that I just read to you. So, and then he shows you where it did just a couple little mistakes it made, but it was pretty on point.
Its jokes would not have been nearly as good as mine. That's all I'm saying. Because my intro jokes are legendary. Oh, sorry. I had to try.
Okay, so let's ask Michael about what he thinks about ChatGPT and AI.
Fine. I'm going to lick my wound over here.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting, and listening to you guys talk about its history. I've had the opportunity over the last 6 months to work with a client who is leveraging GPT-3, OpenAI, and a lot of these technologies to try to do document summarization and a number of other tasks to help reduce the amount of human time it takes to do medical claims. And so that's kind of a nice usage of it. When I hear things like it writes scripts and it creates beautiful photography and illustrations, then that starts to get into a weird space for me, because I think maybe we'll cover some of this. You know, I have both sort of a creative and a technology background, and I like both of them, but when they start to merge together, some very interesting and sometimes maybe even disturbing things start to emerge. So I kind of pause on that point, but Lenza and Chat GPT and things of that nature, I mean, they're here and they're not going to go away, and they've been sitting in the background getting smarter year over year over year. So I think it has huge implications on, software development, on creative development as well.
Based on the way all of these work, whether it's visual or chat, I can foresee a future job is the prompter, right? Someone who has the skills, because it's not like a normal sentence you write to make the best, right, version of the image or whatever. So someone like, you want a picture of Elvis on a banana playing with doing a cartwheel, whatever. You have to ask that in a very specific way, and I could totally see that being a really weird job. that you're very good at this. I'm a good prompter. Right. I'm an AI prompter. I don't know. I could totally see that being
It's
a
like
new
Google.
type
I mean,
of
anybody can search Google, but then there's people who really know how to leverage the
Google
way
foo.
you can use keywords for searching Google. Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah. I think fine tuning is an art. I think in some cases, right? So these systems are only effective if you teach them. It's like teaching a young person how to, giving them an education or teaching them how to ride a bike. You've got to give them all of what they need to be able to perform. So I could certainly see that as a big part of that could be a major job in the future. Fine tuner.
I'll tell you, in development circles, there is a huge difference in skill set of how good you are at Google. Like that's a thing. If you can ask the right question to get the right thing from Stack Overflow or wherever you're going, that sets you apart from other devs. And so I could totally see that being a skill in the future for what.
Thank God for Stack Overflow.
Oh my gosh, dude. Well, it's funny. I'm old and I tell my devs who are much younger than me, I started coding when the only place to go was a book. You would go to buy an O'Reilly book, right? That because they made all of them. They had the monopoly, and you had a question. You went to the index and you hoped you could think of what it was called, and then you went to that page, and then you went to websites that charged you for it, right? You could ask the question, but if you wanted the answer, you had to join as a member and pay, and that is so mind blowing by today's standards. Anyway, that's.
I learned Photoshop from the Adobe book and then Peachtree Publishing series of books that came with CD-ROMs with tutorials and resource files. Yeah, that was crazy.
I could tell you my version of the story, but it would age me out and the interview would be over. So
You got the cards? Did you bust out the cards?
I mean, I missed that, but I came in, I had a Commodore 64 and an Apple II, and I programmed Pascal in college, and yeah, I missed the cards. I didn't Fortran, but yeah, there was no Stack Overflow or O'Reilly books. I think it was, like just some magazine from a specialty shop, and you're on your own.
Speaking of college, this is a true story. My freshman year, I went to a small college in Louisiana called Centenary, and it was a liberal arts school. And I decided I wanted to do computers, so I took Pascal 1, right? And then I enjoyed that class and decided to do Pascal 2. I was literally the only student in that class.
Did they just cancel the class?
I was literally the whole semester. I was the only, and that was to their credit. They said, hey, we'll try to work with you, because it was a tiny little private school, and we'll try to work with you, and we'll build you a major. I'm like, man, if I'm the only one at Pascal 2, there's no computer major here. So I went to Texas A&M after that. But that was the easiest A, because it's not like she can't stop if I raise my hand, she literally has to stop. But anyway,
that's pretty
let's
cool.
talk about you a little bit more. So you are currently, I should say, the founder of a company called Marketecture, but you're coming off of a very big transition in your life. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Marketecture is a company that was started back in 2001, and it came at the tail end of the dot-com era. I had a business called VisionFactory, which was a traditional marketing communications company. And we did a lot of solutioning and started dabbling with repeatable, what we called a product at the time. It really wasn't. But we created the company to basically incubate what the next big thing was going to be. And we tried a number of different avenues where we were combining our skills that we had built up at using database-driven marketing of its era and using audiovisual technology and interactivity to be able to communicate in trade shows and corporate environments. And BrightDoor just so happened to be an idea that was to take a lot of that technology into the residential real estate space, which was pretty much defined whether you go to a model home builder or to a community that has a welcome center. It was a lot of clipboards and little push pins on a paper map. And so we envisioned this product solution that would allow you to communicate with customers and also to give them a physical experience, interactive experience when they came to visit, that was digitally driven, digital registration, digital topo maps. And this was all like in the mid 2000s where you had to, the access to the technology to try to orchestrate to pull it off was not something you picked up at Best Buy. So, but we built that business. It sort of incubated and grew out of Marketecture. And my co-founder, Devin Spear, and I, we started the company, and we did what you typically do. We bootstrapped until we found a customer who was willing to help be our angel investor, so to speak. We were able to grow our platform and raise capital. And we were really ramping the business, selling to a lot of gated communities and destination resort markets and things of that nature. And then the real estate market crashed hard. And this is not this version of the crash that we're having right now. It was the actual Lehman Brothers crash. And it really knocked us down to our knees. And we had to survive the business, which we did. And at that point, what was ramping up sort of leveled out. And we kept the business going, though, because we built a CRM product that competed within the circles we operated in with, the Salesforces and Microsoft Dynamics. But we were, vertically oriented and provided, I think, a simpler, easier way for real estate developers to manage their relationships and their communication. So long story short is, and this is one of my points of perseverance in being an entrepreneur, was, sort of staying in the game long enough for not only the market to get better, but also for the market in some cases to kind of grow up around us, because we were doing some things I thought were pretty unique. And eventually that did lead us to a company that was interested in taking forward what we built, and so was able to exit last November. And so that's sort of in a nutshell, the story of BrightDoor.
So you have, take Marketecture and put it, I guess it's the bubble, but let's look inside that for a second.
Yep.
You have created an idea, bootstrapped it, built it, grew it, and sold it, which is ultimately what every entrepreneur wants to do, right? That's very cool. Congrats.
And you had to endure the hardship of the market crashing for the specific industry.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm not passing into that. But that's ultimately what every entrepreneur starts their idea from. Either they're going to run it for the rest of their lives, or they're going to sell it, right? Those are really your two options, or failure. Right? There's your three. And you've done that, and I think that's amazing. And so there's so many questions here, right? Because what we try to do with our audience is break those pieces apart, because everyone's in some form of that. Most people who are listening to us want to run a business, are struggling with a business, or they're killing it and they just want to get better at it. Right? That's our audience. And so you've done all the pieces. So let's start with the beginning. You built this. Now you're a technical person, right? So you were able to do a lot of the technical stuff in-house. So or did you outsource? How did that get built?
Oh yeah. So let me, and I'll just, be very candid. I am technology proficient, but I am not a software developer in the truest sense of the word. I can dabble, but I'm a better player coach. And I also have a creative background. And so, for me, it was trying to figure out my role within the business, which was really had those multiple facets to it. It was, one is, how do we build the product? Who do we work with? And when we started the company, we actually worked with some developers who used to be employees at VisionFactory, who had gone out on their own and started their own development business, software development business. And so they helped us lift, the kind of MVP product off the ground. So, for me, it was understanding what technology could do and how it was going to be wired and what the requirements were going to be and how we get it done. And then the other part of it was just a creative part of telling a story. Real estate's an emotional purchase. When people buy a home, it's not like, even though it could be this soon, they go online and flip a few switches and that's it. That actually kind of is more the reality, but it wasn't at the time. So I think it was really understanding how to pull both of those pieces off, how to be able to give marketing a platform in which to communicate, and then how do we build the technology, and how do you build something that, hopefully can be delivered at scale.
So how did you, if you are someone who was in your shoes, early on, you have the vision, you have the creative side, you know what you want. What advice would you give to someone when they needed to manage an outsourced team? Like, how did you did that successfully? That's not normal, right? Let's be honest. Most people, I mean, our clients are, a lot of them, they come to us because it fails so often, right?
Right.
It's a tough, difficult process that doesn't succeed often. How did you successfully do it?
I think a lot of it is communications and expectations, and I will be the first to admit that, like a lot of people, even though I call myself an accidental entrepreneur, I didn't set out to do it when I was a kid. I sort of found that the best way to do the things I wanted to do was to start businesses, and so I sort of fell into that part of it. But I think ultimately, it's what is it you're trying to build, and how best can you visually articulate that. So for me, working with developers, I know that there's a traditional path of writing requirements documents, and that's a big part as well. Don't get me wrong, the written piece, but I'm visual and I'm creative. So for me, it's actually giving people the storyboards of, like, this is what this product is going to be like. This is the experience I want to deliver to the users of the product, and then just working closely to make sure that they understand them being the development team, whether they're in-house or out of house, how we get there, like what's the roadmap for getting there. So I think a lot of it is I mean, it's kind of a cop out to say it's communication, but it's how do you visualize what that product needs to be, and how do you mobilize the development group to be able to pull off what you want? Because you can just hand over a set of just written documents, and you may give it to 5 different companies, you get 5 different things back. So
that's for sure. Now, was this team local in your area where you can have in-person visits?
Yeah. So so this was a local group, and so we benefited. They were not offshore; they were right here in Raleigh. So they literally sat in our office and worked, and so that's a huge benefit. And eventually, we built, as we fundraised, we built our own development in-house, completely in-house. And then eventually, so that's part of the story of the company, because it did go on for probably more years than I think any of us thought, even though we got it to the finish line. We did wind up in a situation where we wound up with a hybrid in-house offshore team. And that was really a huge like transition too, in terms of how to articulate what it is that needs to be built, a new feature, a new product. That was a whole new level of communication and preparation.
Yeah.
So I love that. I mean, communication is so key, because most people, like you said, they will hand off a spec, or a spec is made together, but that they think that everyone understands, and a lot of assumptions are made. What would be, and I don't want to be on this for too long, but what would be your one advice? Is communicating to a dev is different. How did you overcome that? Like, what was it that took it to that next level? It's not like talking to a normal human being and saying, hey, we're going to go to the store. You've got to be very, purposeful and detailed. And most people have a really tough time with that. So I'm just trying to think of ways that might help someone else in your shoes.
Yeah. Well, I think it helps. So, listening to you ask that question, I was just thinking, like, wow, I got to come up with a really smart sounding answer here.
Not required. I mean, we don't sound smart.
Yeah, I think I had the benefit. So I'll kind of go at it this way. I had the benefit of being pretty technology centric and competent. And so I understand what developers go through in getting their work done, and how they approach it, and the tools that they use. And so even if I'm not writing the code, I think I have a foundational understanding, whether I'm writing a requirement or sitting in front of someone and communicating to them, of what we want to build and how we want to build it. Obviously, the documentation is a part of that. So I think the other thing is, I guess I would say, learn as much as you can. You don't have to be a developer. It doesn't hurt if you actually take a class and learn a language, or at least at a basic level, because I think it'll make you a better communicator, and you'll be able to, as a manager, to understand better how to work with developers if you know what they go through to get their work done, and an appreciation for it too, quite honestly. I think the other part of it is, and this kind of goes to my interest in cinema and in the creative, like, it doesn't have anything to do with writing code. It's more of, what is the dream that what is it we're trying to accomplish, and how can we visualize that? So you do wireframes, that's one piece, but I'd go to the level of actually designing and colorizing and prototyping and actually building something that looks and feels like what I want it to feel like. Because the easiest thing to get lost in translation when you're building software is how's this thing going to look and feel, and what is the user experience going to be like? Because ultimately, a lot of developers are not able to bring that piece to the table. Unfortunately, I've run across some that have, and they're unbelievable. But that's more the exception than the norm.
It's similar to like my role in the company is translating that vision over to the technical aspect of how are we going to build that vision to feel and look like how, the final product that I imagine and the client approved to be done.
Right.
And like you said, you kind of have an edge when you can speak somewhat of their language, their meaning like a technical language for the developer, whether it's, in your case, it was software, but a lot of times too, if it's just web apps or something where you have a basic understanding of even HTML, CSS, or just the box model and the structure of how things are built in a browser, that can be an advantage in trying to communicate to a developer as well. Just letting them understand that that there's multiple layers to making just this one little piece, and you can kind of walk through how you envision those steps to happen. Yeah, that's definitely helpful in the communication process.
Yeah. I think we learn, especially in the modern programming world today, development world, I think the more that you can educate yourself, and I'm saying this from the perspective of someone that's going to manage a team or wants to start a company and build a software product, the more that you can understand about, like, once this thing is envisioned, how's it going to get executed, the better. I mean, there's no question there's benefit in that. It'll make you feel more integrated in the process, and it will help them when they run up against problems. You can even jump in and help, problem solve if you hit a wall in any particular aspect of production.
How were you able to translate urgency and timelines along with the high level of technical execution? Like, does that make sense? I know if you have a vision and there's a feature that has to be built, but you are on a deadline and a timeline. And while your pie in the sky option seems like it's just going to take way too long, is that where you go into the base level and just say, okay, we just have to build out what can be a decent representation and then come back to it?
Let's just get this part done. I had and this is one of those areas too, as you get a little older, you have, I think, a better perspective on your strengths and weaknesses. But one of my weaknesses is this attention to detail too early in the game. And I remember sitting, and it has nothing to do with software development, but I was sitting in an editing room and a guy was cutting a video together for me. And I was getting all caught up in this one little piece. And he's like, I have all these holes in the timeline that I have to fill. Please let me fill them. I'll worry about making sure that one little area looks good for you. So I think it's like, to get back to the question that you asked, I think it's like, what is it that we have? What is the version that we can build if there's a time crunch that gives us the best result that we can then iterate on or build on? Because sometimes you're not driven by time. Sometimes you are driven by time. And oftentimes, I have been driven by that. And I think if you're a perfectionist, it's a very frustrating place to be, because you want to keep iterating and smoothing and refining, or keep adding onto a feature or whatnot. But I think you have to have the discipline to understand, where can we get given the time constraint, and understanding what the priorities are.
Learn when to let go for the sake of the project.
It's hard to let go. I think it's if you start a business or you build a product and it's yours and it's a passion, I think there's a natural inclination, depending on how you're wired, to want to hold on to something and keep just, a little bit more, when sometimes it's better to, let it go and then make it better as you go forward.
So I want to change gears a little bit. One of the things we talk about a lot is what we call the slog, which is when you have an idea and it's your job, and no one cares. That's basically what you have an idea. You think it's going to change the world, but no one knows you exist, so they don't care. And it's your job as the founder to make them care. Mm-hmm. We have named that the slog because we see it all the time with our clients. It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your history, you almost had two slogs. You had the original one where no one knew what BrightDoor was and no one cared. and two, the market is trash in 2008, and you have to make them care again. So you were successful in both attempts, which again, highly unusual. What is it that helped you keep going? And let me give some context to that. We talk a lot of times when startup founders come to us and they're talking about the big payday, and they're talking about they're going to sell this thing or whatever, right? Their exit. They're talking about that from day one.
Right.
And we're like, that is not going to keep you going through the slog when no one cares and you're yelling and no one's listening. And that payday that may or may not come 5-10 years from now is not going to keep you getting up every day, right? So what was it that kept you motivated? What was it? A passion for real estate? Was it a passion for the product itself? Was it just dogged determination? What are those things that kept you going?
Yeah, it was probably some of a couple of those things. It was certainly there was a belief in the idea, and I would say to someone who says, "I want to start a business to make money," I'll be like, "Don't bother," because if you don't have a passion for whatever it is that you want to do, that you're willing to do it for nothing, then don't try to do it to make $1 million. You probably, I mean, I'm sure there are examples where I'm wrong, but most of the time you're not going to be successful because you will hit the wall, and then you won't have a passion for what it is you're trying to do to back it up, and you're done. So I think it was belief coming out. Just to give a little additional context. So VisionFactory was, it wasn't a product business, but we did a lot of custom solutioning and things of that nature that we really enjoyed. That business was killed by the dot-com bubble because our primary customers were IBM, Nortel, Cisco, and then these companies completely stopped spending money when the bubble burst, and it killed our business. And so there was a bad taste in my mouth that we had to walk away from that, and that felt bad. And so I think that there was a passion for the idea, and I think there was a willingness to persevere. And that perseverance went over a number of years that finally got us to the finish line. And there's certainly times when, to your point, the slog is real. Like the slog was significantly real in the BrightDoor story. But I think we believed that we could get to a point that, we felt happy and we would be able to exit the business. And the other thing I would add is working with people that you love to work with, and then you become committed to their success. And that was definitely part of the BrightDoor story. We wound up being pretty short-staffed. And so the people that were part of the business were people that did it for more than just the money themselves. And so to me, I felt a commitment to them to try to, see the company to its, to the finish line.
Very cool. Very cool.
So you built that team dynamic based around like everybody with the shared vision and the shared passion for the project.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I find that the slog is what kills more startups than almost anything. I mean,
it's a make or break moment. For sure.
Yeah, it's probably number 2 to cash flow, right? For a startup, cash is oxygen, right? You do not exist without it, and balancing that is really tricky. But the slog, I think, is right behind it because it just saps your energy, right? It's
right.
Just everything I'm doing fails. I say this often, but there's a quote that a famous startup guy, at least locally, he started Brasco, if you know that. He gave a speech and he said every entrepreneur has 2 songs in their head. Everything is awesome from the Lego movie. And,
right.
Everything is everything is ruined by Bob Dylan. I can't remember the exact. Everything is ending, something like that. But they're both playing at the same time, and I'm like, that is such an accurate description of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Because you could be on the highest of highs and the lowest of lows in the same day. And I think it's not for the faint of heart. It really, really isn't. And not saying that to discourage anyone.
Sure.
But it's something that you got to go in eyes wide open. And I think you're a good example because I can imagine your frustration when you're like, hey, we have our own gravity. People starting to care about us. We're doing well. And then 2008 comes and you're in the bottom again. It's like, oh, yeah. I thought I was done with this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was actually in, I think I had a couple of our guys were in Dubai and I was in New York on a little family getaway, and our investors, they're talking about the Lehman Brothers, our investors said, don't come home. And so you talk about a slog ensuing. It was like, get home and figure out how to cut it to the bone. And we were one of pretty much every VC-backed company at that time. and so, yeah, no, there's no question. And I don't know if it was just serendipitous, but I'm a pretty even keeled person. So I don't get too high and I don't get too low. I tend to be probably ignorantly optimistic. And so for me, even in the slog, it wasn't something that I sort of manifested on the people that were working on me. And I tried to have a good attitude and just say, hey, look, tomorrow's going to be better. Or next, year's going to be better. We're going to find some cool customers and a new niche. Eventually, we actually built a new product towards the tail end. And then our core platform was what was valued in the company sale. So yeah, I think again, I think you have to love what you do. You can't go into it with the single purpose of like, hey, I just want to make some money, because you probably won't. And if you do, it's going to take a long time. So you better love what you do.
Awesome.
The resurgence of BrightDoor after it got back from a marketing standpoint and coming back out of that slog to make people care again. What did you find was your main driver to get your name out there? Was this before social media advertising was a huge thing, or at the beginning of that? Is that what you leveraged, or was it a lot of networking and word of mouth type thing?
Sure. And in fairness, real estate is a pretty big space. The part of it that we were servicing was not the general brokerage. So today people think of companies like the Redfins and Compasses and Zillows. They're software and technology partners or companies that are selling or reselling homes in the general brokerage space. Our niche was more that people that were, was the builders that were building homes and the people that were building communities that those homes were being built in. So it was very much more of a B2B type of solution, and we had some good brand equity in spite of things. So it really was a subset or a niche within residential real estate that was not a massive one. Now, our goal, so to your point,
so you were like one of the options for them to market themselves to customers.
Yeah. So I think we were, yes. Yeah, for sure. Now, what we did is we realized we need to be another, and this maybe is kind of more of a story for others, is once you get in there and you see the landscape, like how do we grow? So looking at other segments or verticals within real estate that had, complementary processes that we could apply our software in. That was a big part of what we did after the crash and in trying to regrow the business, and then eventually, building a new product, and then somebody saying, "Hey, I like the other product." It's like, okay.
So when you came to the point where it was time to sell,
mm-hmm.
How did you go about doing that? Did you know somebody? Did you get an M&A firm? Did you just reach out to your investors and they took it from there? How did that deal come to be?
So it was just a relationship connection. So it wasn't an M&A firm or someone of that nature. And I didn't tell this part of the story, but a local angel investor bought the company back from our original investor group, and then brought me back in as an owner of the business. So that was kind of nice because, when you go and raise, do an A round and all that, you as an owner tend to get fairly diluted. And so this local angel provided some oxygen and sort of breathing room for us to explore, how to get BrightDoor to the finish line. So to go back to your original question, the way that we got connected with the buyer was through a relationship, and like, hey, you just need to call this person, and we did. I did, and we made a connection. Originally, it was, hey, what if we partner? And then we're like, well, here's some other options, and so that was kind of the way it went. So it was great because, at least from my perspective, as an entrepreneur, you're not giving away pieces of the company sale in a broker kind of scenario.
Okay, very cool. I find so few people have that perspective of the successful sale, so I wanted to ask that.
Sure.
So now that BrightDoor is done, closed up, you've been a year since it's been, what is next for you? What are you starting something new that you're excited about? Or are you just kind of seeing what's out there? What are you up to nowadays?
Well, I've been a deep fake AI video the whole time, so this is a new product, is the virtual me doing a podcast, a video / audio podcast. So I kind of said, a lot of people ask me that question, and one of the, I think the beauties of the entrepreneurial market and the Triangle community is I met a lot of folks, and so and have a lot of good relationships. And so there were different ones that said, hey, look, when you're available, come help me with this, or, I want you to help me do that. And so I've really spent the bulk of this year since May doing that, really just using Marketecture as my launch pad to do some pure play life sciences marketing, branding, content development work. And then with this other firm doing some UX and product work. That was kind of when we talked about AI. And so going into next year, I think, I'm probably going to continue to do that, but I'll have to admit that the last month or two, I've started to get a little itchy to maybe try to do something new in the product space. And so we'll see what 2023 holds, but I have a few ideas now that are starting to percolate, but I just didn't want to feel committed to having to jump right back into something coming off of BrightDoor. I wanted to be able to, kind of take a deep breath and reset.
Just don't ever get rid of the name Marketecture.
Yeah, well, it was marketing architecture, right? Which I guess sort of was the, maybe I'll go back. I have some old product ideas from 2001 that maybe now we could actually execute, because when we thought of the idea, it was like, there's no technology to support it. So.
So one of the things we like to end with, we like to ask this question to everybody. If you're talking to someone in your shoes 20 years ago, or someone who's got an idea and they don't know what to do, what are your top 3 pieces of advice for any new business startup or struggling, entrepreneur?
But let me preface this before you answer.
Okay.
Try to avoid any of the regular cliches of the hustle culture that you might see posted online. Like, what are the real world examples?
Yeah. So So I think you don't have to worry about that, because I don't read those. So, and if I say one of those, it was purely an accident.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and let me make sure I kind of answer you and make sure I got the question correct. It's sort of like, what are the 3 sort of things that you would tell someone that's looking to start a business, or?
Generally we just try to phrase it in such a way to kind of broaden the conversation a little bit, right?
Okay.
And because we've heard your story and it's a great story, and now we're saying, and you've succeeded, right? Which so few people do, unfortunately. So we're just saying, hey, you've got this treasure trove of knowledge. If someone came to you, whether they're a 20-year-old right out of college or in college or whatever, or a 40-year-old who's just finally diving in, what would be advice you would give them to give them a good push?
Okay. Yeah, no, I think one thing I would say, and this is again just from a lesson learned where I probably fell into this trap, was, and this is a 101, right? But I think sometimes we forget about it, or we say, oh no, it doesn't apply in this case, which is just make sure you're solving a problem. I think today, especially with technology, you can be a bit of a kid in a candy store, and it's like, wow, we could do this and we could connect that and we can do all of these wonderful things. But a lot of times you build a solution and then you don't really have your audience defined. So then you go chase down, who would this work for? And I think most of the time that doesn't work. So, it's really just a level foundational thing, is like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Don't solve a problem that you don't know what the problem is. And we kind of, honestly, I think we did a little bit of that, in the past, right? I think even with BrightDoor, just to be completely candid, we were taking a lot of ideas that we had in other sort of utilizations or use cases and thinking like, this would be really cool as a digital overlay in the real estate space of registration, presentation, follow-up, and which all sounds fantastic, right? And then we went out and we're like, who's going to actually pay for this? Well, like the builders are like, well, we don't pay for things that model homes, the developer does. And the developer's like, well, we don't. So my point being, I'll pause on that, is just make sure you are addressing a known, identifiable, definable need with whatever it is that you're trying to build. And don't worry about what tech stack you're going to use and how it's going to look or any of that stuff until you've well defined it. So that would be one. And maybe that's a cliche, but I think it's something that it doesn't hurt for people.
No, that was great.
Yeah. Sort of like wag the dog, or the dog chasing its own tail. So, yeah, I'd say that's one. I think certainly, being malleable and being fluid and in terms of being able to change. If you have a vision for something, let's say you've identified a problem, there may be a certain way that you want to see it built or expressed. But then what you find out is that the market doesn't really like your idea of how it is that you're trying to express it. But if you do it slightly differently, then yeah. But sometimes I think entrepreneurs are so stubborn. It's their way. Like there's only one Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs didn't need focus groups because he's like, I know what the product's going to be. And so I don't need people to tell me what the product is. I know, right? But he's one person. I think most people benefit from understanding. So once you get down into whatever your journey is, your entrepreneurial journey, I think it's being willing early and often to feedback and to adaptation, and don't feel that that's failure. That's simply you continuing to learn more about the space as you go forward. And I think the third one, I don't know, I just think perseverance. And, I know you guys probably listen to, you do your own podcast, you listen to a lot of podcasts. I always enjoyed listening to the one from NPR, How I Built This. And one of the things I thought was interesting, regardless of whether you're Southwest Airlines, Instagram, whatever it is that these entrepreneurs started or built, they persevered. Like they just didn't give up. They stayed in the game. And I think that's why you have to love what you do, because if you don't, you won't stay in the game. But a lot of times just staying in the game, eventually things line up, and a lot of success in the entrepreneurial space is timing. And you can't plan timing. You just have to be there when the time is right. So I think that was probably ultimately what got BrightDoor to the finish line, is the time became right. And there was an opportunity that had we not persevered, we'd have never seen it through.
So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. If anyone was interested in reaching out to you for mentorship or to network in the local Raleigh area where we are, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so absolutely, and I'd appreciate that. You can just email me, Michael at Marketect. So it's not Marketecture all the way, it's Marketect.io. Marketect.io is the website. And yeah, just let me know, and I'm glad to connect. That's one of the, as I mentioned in the interview, one of the great opportunities I've had is to meet a whole lot of folks in this community. And Scott Wingo used to be on our board. I know he does the Triangle Tweener group, and that's fantastic. So I'd like to, in my own way, where I can connect and add value, I'm happy to do so. Very
cool. All right, Gary, it's your turn. If people want to get in touch with us, how would they do so?
If you want to get in touch with us, make any comments, or have any options for us to talk about any topics, you can email us at hello@thebigpixel.net, or you can reach out to us on any of our social media channels, including the YouTube comments below this video if you get there. Most people listen to it on the podcast. You can find the links in the show notes there.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. This has been wonderful. And best of luck in your next phase after BrightDoor. And keep us informed. We'd love to have you back when you take your next steps.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Happy holidays.
You too.